This episode of the Device Talks Weekly Podcast is brought to you by Device Talks Tuesdays. Join us this Tuesdays for a session called Impact on MDR on Biocompatibility. Is there a shortage of expertise? We're going to be hearing from the experts from Nelson Labs, as well as Convatec and Cardinal Health. Just go to devicetalks.com to find out more about this fascinating conversation. All right, you ready for this?
Ready.
Hey everyone, it's Tom Salemi here. Welcome back to the Device Talks Weekly Podcast, and welcome if you are a first-time listener. I don't usually say this at the top, but I'd like to remind you to subscribe to Device Talks. You can find us on all of your podcast channels, Spotify, Amazon, Google, Apple. We are there. Push that subscribe button, and you will receive this podcast every Friday afternoon-ish, sent directly from me to you. So please do subscribe. This week, got a great thought-provoking episode for you. So first, I'm going to speak with Achuta Kadambi. He is the assistant professor at the UCLA School of Engineering. He is going to talk a bit about a paper he wrote for Science, and we'll provide the link to it on our podcast notes about whether or not physics and product design and medical devices is introducing some unintended biases on different body types, on different races. So fun conversation with Achuta, very thought-provoking. I'm sure you'll enjoy that. Second, in our closing conversation, I get to speak with Liane Teplitsky. Liane Teplitsky is the Vice President, General Manager of Worldwide Robotics at Zimmer Biomet. This makes her our first guest from Zimmer. Very excited about that. Liane switched over from cardiac and heart, where she had built her career in engineering and sales, to lead Zimmer Biomet's effort in ortho. And she has a very, very good reason why. Great conversation about her career and where Zimmer is headed in the ortho space. So let's not delay. Let's bring in my podcast partner, Chris Newmarker, the executive editor of Life Sciences at MassDevice. Chris Newmarker, how are you, sir?
Doing well, man. Happy Friday.
Happy Friday. It's been an interesting week.
Busy week.
Yeah.
Busy week.
Lots of news. Lots of got my jab on Sunday, my J&J jab. And then on Monday, of course, the news came out. But
I know that must have been cheery. It's been like thanks.
I'm not at all worried, but it's just like, you're just like you were waiting for that. And then it's like, oh wait. Like, don't feel absolutely relieved just yet, but I'm sure it'll all work out. And it'd be interesting to see what the guidelines prove to be once they hopefully restart use of the vaccine.
Yeah, it's like going to a picnic with chicken barbecue, and then finding out that the host was thawing the chicken breast in the hot tub or something. I mean, it's just like it's just
that
tough.
might be the most disgusting thing I've ever heard, Christopher. Has this happened to you?
I had an acquaintance. He said once he went over to his dad's house. That's what his dad said. He was like, "What? Like, what are we?"
There's nothing left to be said.
Yeah.
Let's move on to the Newmarker.
Let's move on. That's done for the week, right?
This is staying in the podcast, though. I want everyone to hear this story. That is, I mean,
didn't happen to me, not my family, like somebody else. I was like, wow.
My dad was notorious for his rare chicken breast that he would cook up, but we would take them inside and throw them in the oven to get them completely done. But I don't think
it's a generational thing.
I don't think he would go that far.
Like, all the water is warm. I could just leave the packages out.
Oh,
Lord. We're ordering some pizzas now. I'm not going to deal with this.
My ear brain is scarred. All right. Let's move on to this week's Newmarker's Newsmakers.
All right. Newmarker, it's interesting. This week we've got a theme.
Do we?
Yeah. I mean, it's...
I hope it's a better theme than our opening segment.
Most of the we've had a
oh dear Lord. Just picture this chicken breast floating. What's our theme this week, Chris Newmarker?
Oh man, we got it's nothing to do with chicken. We've got it's actually M&A deals. We've got a lot of M&A deal news this week.
Well, that seems far more appropriate than our initial conversation.
Yes.
So yes, let us hit with number 5 on the Newmarker Newsmakers list.
Just to throw in a disclaimer: do not thaw out chicken in a hot tub.
Yes, we are not advocating that.
We recommend that.
Yeah. Surgeon General advises you against thawing chicken in your hot tub. Oh god.
Anyway.
I'll put a disclaimer at the end of the podcast. Don't worry, Chris. We'll be legally covered.
That's right.
What's number 5?
Number 5 on the list, we've got Vicarious Surgical. It's a SPAC deal. We got another one of these special purpose acquisition company deals.
SPAC attack.
SPAC attack. SPAC attack. SPAC attack.
SPAC attack.
And SPAC attack is stolen from our listener Ryan Blasco, who offered it on my LinkedIn post when I posted about this yesterday. So Ryan Blasco, thanks for contributing to the podcast. Thanks for listening. And of course, share and tell your friends. Go ahead, Chris Newmarker.
So this is going to be a $1.1 billion deal in which a Hong Kong-based SPAC called D8 Holdings is going to acquire Vicarious, take them public. The plans, they're going to be on the New York Stock Exchange under the symbol RBOT. But this has been a company that's gotten a lot of attention in the robotic surgery space. So it's kind of neat to see it going public, and it's always interesting to find out who the people are behind the SPACs, because they're a lot about the type of people who are running them. Because people are basically saying we're going to invest in you because we trust you're going to find a really interesting company to take public. And Donald Tang, the co-founder and president of D8 Holdings, he's a major private equity figure in Hong Kong, and the CEO is David Chu, who founded and built Nautica.
It's an interesting combination. And we had Vicarious in the podcast last August, I think it was, September. And Adam Sachs, the CEO and one of the co-founders, great guy. This company felt really early stage to me, really fascinating miniature robotic technology. So for this company to go public through a SPAC at that higher price, I'm not sure what to. I guess I can't be surprised anymore. It's a great company. No knock against Vicarious. I just didn't see it going public at this stage. So
they're going to be getting $425 million in cash, upon the deal.
That's fantastic. Great.
That'll be a big investment.
It's going to be another big mover in surgical robotics and digital surgery. They have a cool VR component. Again, miniature robots that can kind of go inside the body and do intricate surgeries. So obviously connected to a surgeon, not little independent robots going in there.
BD's putting money into them. They got some other existing investors you might know, like people like Bill Gates, Eric Schmidt.
Yeah. It's funny, of all the investors that you listed, BD surprised me the most. Do you know why they would have an interest in a robotics company? I guess they don't really strike me as a digital surgery type of.
I have no idea, but this would be my educated guess, would be that BD in some ways thinks they could make tools around this thing.
Oh, great point.
That'd be my guess.
Great point.
I encourage somebody at BD to reach out to me. I might be totally wrong. I mean, this is just a guess, but maybe they're looking at how all these other companies can sell tools around robots, and they're like, well, this is a robot that looks like there's some really interesting stuff, and maybe we could, create some stuff to go around.
Well, you are a medtech media mogul, and I co-host the best podcast that comes out on Fridays about medical devices. So
there we go.
You and I will chase this question now. We'll get some answers.
We will find out. I'll be reaching out to BD after we record this podcast. So, all right. So we should move on. Number 4 on the list. We've got a Wall Street Journal report that Medline Industries is looking for buyer in what could be like a $30 billion deal. Medline declined to comment, for the article, but if it's true, I mean, this would be a huge deal if it goes down. I mean, Medline is privately held, but it's actually one of the largest medical device companies in the world. I admit, I'm kind of ignorant about Medline. So, I mean, what are they known for mostly? Yeah, I mean, I just don't think they're as well known just because they're, they haven't been a public company, but, actually, like, they've been doing, really, I mean, they've actually like thrived amid the, pandemic, because they're meeting a lot of demand for PPE amid the pandemic. So just a big supplier of like all kinds of stuff that they make, and they've even been reprocessing N95 respirators. They started cranking out hand sanitizer at a plant in Wisconsin. So yeah, it's an interesting company, and we'll see whether this is true. I mean, sometimes when like people like WSJ or Bloomberg have sources close to the deal saying, people familiar with the matter saying something's going to happen, it doesn't happen. But it's interesting. We'll see if something goes down.
Achuta Kadambi, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Great to have you here. Following up on a paper you wrote for Science called Achieving Fairness in Medical Devices. And it's an interesting analysis sort of some of the inequities in our medical devices themselves. We talk about inequities in access to medical care and medtech, but I don't know if we've spent a lot of time really talking about how our devices may not function as well as they should for everyone, or at least how they should be tested differently against everyone. So what was the genesis of this paper?
Right. So the genesis is actually from personal experience. It's from a very trivial incident. I was traveling in Europe and I had to use the restroom, and then I was washing my hands, using soap, trying to use the towel dispenser. And I had a lot of trouble getting my hand to trigger these devices. So I was sitting there trying. Other travelers were looking at me like, is he new? Does he not know how to use the automatic? And so I had to eventually ask, a fellow traveler with kind of a different skin type to trigger it. And, first time he puts his hand there, it triggers. This is a very trivial incident. It's just a minor inconvenience in this case. But when you think about light-based devices, so my background is in optics and imaging, and we work a lot with light-based devices. Mm-hmm. Light-based devices generally don't play as well with darker skin. The reason is you get less light that reflects back, and you get lower signal, right? And lower signal to noise ratios. Then I kind of took that experience from the airport and trying to trigger these automatic syncs, and then started thinking about how medical devices had potentially similar implications, especially light-based medical devices. Mm-hmm. And that's what kind of was the genesis of this piece, is to really look at, when somebody doesn't really have any, I don't want to use strong terms like racist or anything like that here, but when someone doesn't really have any potentially ill intent, but simply designs the device based on their own experiences, sometimes we can see that it doesn't generalize to a broader community.
So, and I know one of the first examples you brought up was the pulse oximeter, which I think has been sort of identified by others as also something that needs to be improved upon. But your background is in light, so this is a perfect way for you to start the conversation. Where do these fall short, and could you speak to maybe some solutions that could be forthcoming?
Right. So I think, first of all, the jury's not out. Companies that make the pulse oximeters, they've put out some technical reports showing that their performance generalizes across skin types. We also have other articles, like, for example, New England Journal of Medicine in 2020, but 2021 actually, came out in the turn of the year, started looking at how when these devices were used clinically, there was a bias against darker skin types. So the jury's not out. You can kind of see different opinions. There's some people who will say it's completely a calibration issue. So I think one of the things that my lab hopes to study using our background in optics is to hopefully more conclusively answer whether the physics is biased or not. So I don't have an answer for you today, but my opinion is that it's not biased. And we're going to look at this objectively and do studies and look at we're going to take this device, tear it apart, hook it up to an oscilloscope and really look at these traces to see if the device is indeed biased from the physics, or if, as the device manufacturers claim, that their device is actually scalable across wide populations.
So talk a bit about that process, what will go on in your lab and how you'll be pursuing this further. Have you acquired different pulse oximeters from different makers, and you're sort of going to be comparing the inner pieces of that and understanding how they work?
Yeah, so I think we're going to do it in twofold. First, we're going to take existing pulse oximeters and try to look at what we can access in these devices. But fundamentally, we're actually going to build our own pulse oximeter based on kind of the vanilla principles of a pulse oximeter. And kind of see, without any sophisticated processing, just looking at the physics of the problem, how that plays out. Because ultimately, as you know, the pulse oximeter is an extremely simple device, not much unlike your TV remote. You basically take an LED and 2 wavelengths, and then you shine it on a fingertip or on other parts of the skin. And based on the reflectance, you can actually infer the blood volume because you're looking at the hemoglobin and kind of the spectral curves will tell you if it's oxygenated or deoxygenated hemoglobin, and that proportion is time varying, and then you can create a signal from that. Now, the issue is that for certain morphologies of skin, it doesn't just need to be darker skin, but certainly other morphologies. For example, some people have thicker skin than others. Demographically, men, for example, have thicker skin. So for these other types of morphologies, how does that signal behave? So that's something that we'll be looking at carefully. And the key to doing this is a partnership so we're at UCLA School of Engineering. That's probably one of the ideal places to do this because we actually share a parking lot with the medical school. So the faculty in engineering share the parking lot with the medical school. Our housing, faculty housing is actually shared between the medical faculty and engineering faculty. And I think this is largely by intent of the university. So we have a strong partnership where we're actually going to be able to test this device on real human subjects, pending, IRB approval and the policies that we have for human subjects research. So we'll get to test this on real people. And in hopefully one of the larger scale studies, we can isolate where the physics of this problem lies. Is it biased or is it not? And provide hopefully that answer. And I don't know how the manufacturers will respond based on our findings, but I think it's something that the scientific community will be interested in seeing.
No, absolutely. And obviously it's been a critical tool used over the past 12 months with COVID to measure the severity of the illness. So where if it's falling short, it's certainly something that needs to be identified and understood. You mentioned that the physical bias in your piece, you said physical bias is not restricted to skin color. You mentioned mechanical design of implants for hip replacements and how the understanding that those earlier designs were really centered around male anatomy and not female anatomy, and it led to the creation of gender-specific implants. Do you see other instances of mechanical design of medical devices that favor one type of people over another, be it gender or race?
Yeah, I mean, there's plenty of such devices that operate based on kind of the normal range of what human beings should be. For example, you have people with conditions of extreme height or extreme kind of shortness, right? And for these people, a lot of dimensions of existing technologies would be difficult. A simple example is your shoe size, right? We know that actually I have awkwardly big feet myself, and we know kind of how difficult it is to.
How'd you know I had awkwardly big feet? You can tell from this the Zoom call. I'm a size 13, triple E.
Same size.
Hey, here we go.
So I think we're right at the edge, like where we still have options. I think we're right at the tail end. So a lot of manufacturers go up to 13 in the stores.
That's right.
But sometimes if you go beyond that, it gets tricky. So, I see the medical device industry is following kind of large an 80-20 rule. That's what business is, right? Ultimately, that's how businesses make their money. But I don't know if that's the ideal solution for something like a medical device, which we want everybody to have similar opportunities.
Looking at the rest of your piece, is the majority of the bias or the discrepancy in data, does it come from more the computational and data side? Just sort of you mentioned X-rays and how the diagnostic application of X-rays was really relying upon a more male heavy sample than female heavy sample. Are we looking at the need to correct more of these informational imbalances than physical imbalances? Or is it a combination of both?
Yeah. So, first of all, there's a lot of colleagues that are cited in the paper, and a lot of this is standing on the shoulders of their work and bringing this to the forefront. So bias in computation, or analogously, I'm going to conflate that with bias in AI. That terminology it's a white hot area of computer science right now. You have hundreds and hundreds of the top scientists in the world working on this important problem. And one of the reasons that this draws a lot of attention is because if you think about a river and, if you think about bias as being pollution, ultimately, you're looking downstream at the river, right? You're looking at, where the river ends. And so the computational aspect is often very close to the end of the river. And so, having a cleanup or treatment plant there traditionally could help. So in other words, the downstream problem has been looked at kind of with, I would say, disproportionate attention, because cleaning up the downstream problem, people believe that that could lead to a fair device. So I think definitely there's biases there, and we need to counteract that. But I think what the piece contributes that is a little bit unique from what's out there from other colleagues is tracing actually bias back down to the fundamentals of physics, going all the way to upstream. And I think that's a really exciting area. So I'm actually not answering your question. I'm bringing it back upstream to the river. And the reason is because when we think about the computational bias, for example, dataset bias, but not limited to dataset bias, this is obviously suboptimal, and we need to fix that right away. But what people often don't realize is that sometimes these devices, through kind of no fault of the engineers, no racist intent or whatever, is simply biased in the laws of physics. And that really excites me, when the laws of physics are biased against something. And I think in order to kind of clean up the river properly, yes, we need to fix computational problems, but I would like to fix problems at every part of that river, so that we don't have compensatory. We don't simply use compute to, for example, compensate for existing biases that we could have fixed at the root.
And I this is a difficult format to sort of analyze a paper like this, because it brings a lot of, it's not heavy in statistics, but it's certainly better read than I think talked about. So I encourage folks to, we did report on it in Medical Design and Outsourcing. It's in the April issue of Science, and it's available online. So if going forward, if you're able to identify a bias from the physics of product development, and perhaps if I'm not phrasing that right, feel free to correct me, what would you see the likely solution or outcome being? Is it the development of different devices used for different people? Or can it be something that's corrected? Can the physics be compensated or corrected with software or changes to data?
Yeah, this is a great question. So I think the first solution that we need to strive for as a community is we need to create an incentive structure to report biases. In other words, today when we publish a paper as a scientist, what is the best way to get your paper accepted? You take a device and you have a table, and your number is better than everyone else. That's your performance is better, right? It's like running a mile. Whoever runs the fastest mile gets their paper into a prestigious venue. So that game, I think, needs to change a little bit, where it's not just the raw performance on your data set, but you actually have to break it down with what is your performance on different groups, and kind of report that balance. Like, this is my overall performance and this is my fairness. And if we can start having a culture of valuing both of these metrics, we'll immediately start seeing the solutions start coming, because people are motivated, and the publication and R&D process motivates these solutions to be developed. So I think that's kind of one of the first solutions that the paper proposes that I think needs to change. Now, the question about what if there's a upstream bias, can you do some downstream compensation? For example, a bias in the physics, can we compensate for that in the software? So I think this solution, the answer is yes. There's potentially some calibration that can be done. But oftentimes, if there is a fundamental bias in the physics, sometimes the downstream calibration can never be done. Okay, so the first answer is yes, right? If you can do the compensation without any trade-offs, do it. Now, as kind of an academic, I'm looking at, all right, what's on the horizon beyond kind of what's non-obvious here. So here's what's non-obvious. You have a bias in the physics that's been reported using this incentive structure of fairness and performance. Your physicist who builds the device says, you know what, this is a cool device, works, you get some data, pretty useful for diagnosis, but it's got a little bit of unfairness on certain groups, but this is what it is, and I'm publishing it and I'm reporting this. Okay, that's awesome. So we're now reporting and we're aware of the biases, and a computer scientist comes along and tries to compensate for that. Now, it may not be possible to fully do calibration to kind of get around the laws of physics. And I'm going to give you a concrete example. Consider the pulse oximeter. The pulse oximeter that we spoke about earlier on this podcast is biased in the sense that you get less light back. Now, how do you deal with getting less light back? Well, you integrate your signal for longer. For example, you take a longer exposure time, or you average, multiple trials and so on. Now, the problem with that, averaging multiple trials, is you can cause artifacts when you then go and do signal averaging. Because, for example, you have signal fluctuations, you have a slight motion in the pulse oximeter, so taking a longer exposure kind of blurs out details. So there are these small compensations that happen, but it's okay to calibrate for that. And again, report what those trade-offs are. Like, yes, we took a longer exposure time to overcome the kind of laws of physics of getting less light, but these are the trade-offs with longer exposure time. So you can see that the device still isn't fully fair, because dark-skinned subjects, they might now get equivalent signal, but there's a trade-off where the negative downsides of long signal averaging start to play into effect. So at this point, the paper talks about a Pareto trade-off. So Pareto was a Italian scientist and economist and essentially a polymath who was saying that, there are some things in the world where optimizing for one metric comes at a disadvantage for another metric. And we kind of repurposed that Pareto principle to come up with this idea that, okay, so there's this trade-off between optimizing for the majority performance and fairness. Mm-hmm. And sometimes, if you take a device and you try to make it perform well, that'll come at the expense of, for example, minority groups. Conversely, if we simply optimize for minority groups, sometimes that can limit us from achieving peak performance potentially is one argument that's sometimes made. And we see this play out actually in society with the COVID vaccine. We had the Moderna vaccine, for instance. And the Moderna vaccine, I remember that now, bear in mind, I wasn't in the boardroom here when the decisions were being made. But, I was reading some of the articles on the Moderna vaccine, and they were talking about how, okay, in order to have an inclusive clinical trial, it took a little bit longer to get those initial trials to test the vaccine safety, which potentially delayed the rollout a little bit. Now, that's kind of a balance between majority versus minority, and they picked a trade-off point there that makes sense for what they're trying to do. So I think as not just as scientists, but also as society, we should start sort of, analyze where we want this trade-off point to lie. Mm-hmm. So once you characterize your fairness, once you've characterized your performance, how do you want to balance between that? And so that's kind of an open question that I think the piece sort of ends with. And that can inform, to kind of answer your question in a very roundabout way, that can kind of inform how we do those computational solutions to compensate for upstream biases.
No, that's a great point. I mean, it certainly would be a first step to at least acknowledge that this device performs better in this population than that population, and give some comfort, or at least some understanding to those who feel frustrated by a certain test. But at the end of the day, I think we need to figure out a way to help everybody equally.
Yeah, and I think there's an interesting point here. They always say that every dinner time discussion or drinks with friends always ends up with one word, and at least in my life, it ends up with aliens. So another argument to be made here, to be clear, is there is a trade-off with what we know about current technology, about the pulse oximeter. But, tomorrow an alien race could give us a new version of a pulse oximeter that works on new physics, mm-hmm. that completely changes that Pareto trade-off, what's called expanding the Pareto frontier. So we should not stop innovating in general to make these disruptive new physics and just push that Pareto frontier out. Now, I don't know that the aliens are going to come next year. So, well, given COVID, you never know, but it's a year. But there's got to be a balance also between what short-term solutions, kind of like what trade-offs we can do with current devices that we can do today, and then what devices we can do when either we have, this brilliant physicist that comes out and invents a new technology, or kind of, again, the aliens come and give it to us, right? So.
Well, if we do get aliens to give us some medical technology, I certainly will work to get them on this podcast. But you're right, that does sort of open up the field of opportunity for those who may see an area that they think is settled by a technology. There actually is a wide open area for them to operate. So great point. Excellent. Well, Achuta, thank you for joining us on the podcast. This has been a fun conversation.
Thanks so much, Tom. Pleasure to be here.
All righty, bring us on to number 3, Chris Newmarker.
It's another M&A deal. We got Endologix acquiring a PQ Bypass, and PQ Bypass makes something called the Detour platform that That's it's like providing a large lumen endograft bypass to treat abdominal aortic aneurysms. Kind of envision like a really long stent type device. It's got breakthrough device designation from FDA, so there could be some fast tracking things for them. But it looks like Endologix is acquiring the technology.
Excellent. All right, good purchase by Endologix. Bring us into number two.
Number two, guess what it is? It's another acquisition.
M&A.
We got Zoll Medical acquiring Respicardia for an undisclosed amount, and Respicardia makes implantable neurostimulators to treat severe central sleep apnea.
We had Tim Herbert from Inspire on a little bit ago on the podcast. Respicardia is certainly another one. So
Neurostim's it's been a hot space.
Yeah.
I mean, just the fact you've got this like pacemaker type tech, and in recent years, all these companies have popped up with ideas like, well, we could take pacemaker tech and use it to zap nerves here or there or whatever to treat different problems. And so yeah, like Zoll's like want to get on the act with treating sleep apnea with Neurostim.
Great. Well, it should be an interesting competitor for Inspire Medical. All right, bring us into number one, Chris Newmarker.
Number one on the list, we've got Siemens Healthineers completing their $16.4 billion acquisition of Varian Medical Systems. Just another huge, giant M&A deal that's done now. And, the companies have been saying they've been touting that this is going to create the most comprehensive cancer care portfolio in the industry. So it's another really huge M&A deal. And it just seems like amid the pandemic, we've just been seeing so much M&A. I suspect it's like there's been a bit of like deal shopping, maybe.
Yeah.
Do you think so, Tom? Yeah.
We talked at the beginning of the year that there was a lot of money out there. There'd be a lot of opportunities for acquisitions, and it seems to be happening. So yeah, this does seem to happen in cycles, though. Not to sound like an old guy on a porch, but
it's true.
But I think everything is COVID related, so I'm sure that had some role into it as companies found efficiencies and found new ways of doing things. Maybe it made acquisitions more obvious than before. So interesting.
Yeah, and I kind of recall we were, seeing a lot of M&A as we were getting out of the Great Recession. So I mean, kind of the same thing. You start to head out of a downturn, like what we had in last year. You start to see a lot of deals. So yeah, we'll see what happens next. Maybe it's the Medline deal. We'll find out.
We've seen a lot, Chris Newmarker, haven't we?
We've seen many things over the years.
Well, Liane Teplitsky, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much. Very happy to be here.
It's great to have Zimmer on the program. I think you're our first Zimmer guest, so it's nice to finally have your company represented. So we are completing our path to world medtech domination by getting every medtech company on here.
Nice.
But I want to follow up on your work at Zimmer. You've got a huge portfolio and program, but I always love to find out a little bit about our guests and about how they found their way into the medtech industry. And my extensive research, which is looking at your LinkedIn profile, tells me that you're a biomedical. You started off as a biomedical engineer. How did you choose this path into medtech?
So I grew up in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, Canada, and going to school there, I actually thought out of high school I wanted to be a doctor, go into medicine. So I started out doing pre-med classes, and so kind of shortly thereafter, I started talking to some doctors. My mom was actually working at the cancer clinic in Saskatoon as a pharmacist. And, I just figured that being right on the front line wasn't going to be quite where I could manage things, right? It was going to be a little bit too emotional. I wasn't sure that I could really handle it, but I thought, the technology behind medicine, now that is something that really interests me. So I went over to the engineering department and I said, how do I do that? How do I help, design and build technology behind medicine? And they said, well, you have to go into electrical engineering, because they didn't even have biomedical engineering at my school at the time. So I changed my main path at school to go into electrical engineering. I still finished my physiology degree, so I was super interested in it, but basically graduated with an electrical engineering degree. And at the time that I graduated, the majority of my class at the time either went into telecom or they went into oil from where I was. And that's not where I really wanted to go. I wasn't thinking that's how I was going to use my degree. I had always said, when people ask me, well, what do you mean by medical engineering? Like, what does that even mean? And I was like, well, like pacemakers, defibrillators, stuff like that, like designing stuff that go into people that helps them. And very fortuitously, I got an opportunity, dream job, dream location. It was with St. Jude Medical, literally designing implantable defibrillators.
Wow.
As a hardware design engineer. Yeah, in Sunnyvale, California.
Whoa.
And so I was out of there, warm weather, honestly, really dream job, exactly what I wanted to do. So I just feel really lucky. And I started there and spent 20 years with St. Jude Medical and then Abbott, and loved my time there. And I got to spend a lot of years just doing a number of different things with that organization, from hardcore engineering all the way through to sales, actually, and kind of everything in between.
That's
just
great.
loving kind of every minute of it. Yeah.
So you started at St. Jude, but then you went back to Duke for a biomedical engineering degree. What led to that?
Again, the hardcore engineering I was doing, I loved it, but it was a lot of time behind the computer screen. And I just thought, I want to be, I really love this idea of patients, having wanted to be a little bit closer to that. And so thought, the opportunity here for me, maybe to go back to school and truly do my master's in biomedical engineering, and had the opportunity to go to Duke to do that, and loved it. And there I was actually sitting, in the electrophysiology lab, recording data, had an opportunity to work both in the biomedical engineering department as well as right in that electrophysiology lab, and got my degree, and then was able to go back, sort of continue and go and work right in the area that I was studying, which was atrial fibrillation at the time, back with St. Jude Medical. So took a small hiatus from industry, but just to get that degree and then continue along that same path.
If you had stayed at St. Jude, continued engineering, continued doing that work, and didn't get that biomedical degree, would you have gone as far as you did? Or what did the biomedical degree give you that you felt you were maybe missing when you first started working at St. Jude?
Right. I think it was just getting more direct clinical application. So when you're looking at timing diagrams, that are going to be in a chipset in a lab, okay, that impacts, the heart, but instead of being really, directly there working and understanding. So my role as I came out of school, I mean, my master's degree there, was really then I was able to be the liaison between the engineers, that are working on the product, and, the physicians in the field. And so to be able to translate exactly what's happening in the lab or the OR and translate it back to the engineers. And I was really at that time doing preclinical data development, first human use trials, bringing new technology to market. So just had, a little bit closer to the patient, but that translational role. And so able to apply both my engineering and some of the additional skills that I gained at school.
So you moved on in your medtech career, and you moved on to the sales side. What was your transition like, or what did your career path follow in medtech?
The major engineering components, I went on and did sort of preclinical, clinical data development, really product development, R&D type work, and then had the opportunity to move over to the business side. And, I always, as a scientist, considered that to be a little bit of the dark side, a lot of hand waving. I wasn't really sure. I'm like, no, I can't do that. I can't just get passionate about if, a brochure is red or blue. I'm sure it's really important, but that's not where my passion lies, I really want to be able to be making a difference and publishing papers and things like that on the scientific side. But of course, when you put yourself into other people's shoes, you realize it's not maybe exactly what you had anticipated it to be, and went over and realized, the value proposition that we're bringing to the market has to do with the scientific data, right? What really are the benefits of this technology, and how is it been proven? And so moving over into sort of a more market development role, I was able to take those learnings from the scientific side and what we were doing there, and then apply them and be able to, have that more for our commercial teams and what we were doing, and looking more at the strategy on what we should be developing, where the needs were in the market, what the gaps were. And so went over and did, a leadership role in marketing, which was sort of a strategy role along with the typical marketing application. And then from there, at the very end, I had never actually carried the bag, and they were like, I think this would be a really good opportunity for you to go out and really do sales. And wow. I thought, you know what? That's probably true. I should do that. Again, I was like, woo, now I'm going all the way to the very edges. And went out into the field, had honestly just a phenomenal team in the field who was very accepting, despite, this is not the normal trajectory. Most people just come up through sales and continue to get promoted in the sales category. So for me not to have been in the field and then move out there at a pretty senior leadership level, I was very grateful to my team that was there that helped me onboard, but I think allowed me to leverage some of the leadership skills and communication tactics that I had used in my past, and just continuing to work to elevate the team. And again, you put yourself in a position where you thought that what I was delivering as a marketing person to the field was getting leveraged in certain ways, and you can understand then, where there may have been some pitfalls and how to improve the entire process, making sure that people are getting the materials that they need and are able to deliver on the asks that they have. So it was a phenomenal learning experience for me, for sure.
Yeah, that's great. It's great to have such a deep understanding of both sides of the house, so to speak. So you were with St. Jude with the acquisition of Abbott, and then from Abbott, you last year, right before looks like the pandemic, or just right as the pandemic was starting to settle, you moved over to Zimmer Biomet. What was the decision there? What intrigued you about the opportunity at Zimmer?
Yeah, it was a tough decision. Moving from something where I knew so well and everyone there had been at the same company. But the opportunity, honestly, was the ability to potentially truly change the standard of care in orthopedics. Mm-hmm. And I had looked at my, career path in what I had done in the cardiovascular space and bringing some new technologies to market. And, they already had a lot of objective measures that they were using in the OR in cardiovascular medicine. And just orthopedics didn't seem to quite be there yet. And this is an opportunity to take sort of a number of disparate teams and really build a business unit around technology and data. And with this goal of helping to transform the company from going from metal and plastic to technology and data. And I couldn't pass on it. It just sounded so amazing that I really was ready to just jump into the orthopedic space and see what we could do.
That's a great point. Yeah, the fact that you're bringing a lot of lessons from cardiac over to orthopedics. And what is your assessment of the orthopedics digital surgery space right now? I mean, we've seen over the last 7 years, really since robotics kind of became part of mainstream offerings with Stryker's acquisition of Mako, and of course Zimmer Biomet and others have brought out their own systems as well. Are we? Well, I'll use my baseball analogy. Are we in the fourth or fifth inning, or is this something that's become firmly entrenched, or are we still in the very early innings? So
I think we're still in pretty early innings. Mm-hmm. But it's accelerating quickly is what I'll say. I think Zimmer Biomet, having brought ROSA to market, and even through the pandemic, through 2020, it really did accelerate. I think there's a new mind share change that technology is going to become an integral part of orthopedics. And, you can look at different things that are tipping points, whether that's COVID, looking at pre and postoperative care and having to remotely manage things, or it's that patients are actually now really becoming more and more involved in their own care pathway. And they're used to using technology every day for everything that we're doing, right? They're using their phones, or they're using their GPS, or whatever the case may be. And I think they're looking for that now, as they're looking at any kind of healthcare that they're getting. So patients are going to be, I think, an impetus to that. And then you hit a level of plateau of outcomes as mm-hmm. well. So still with knee replacement, 1 in 5 patients isn't completely satisfied. Length of stay isn't necessarily getting a whole lot better. You're not improving efficiencies as much, let's say, within the OR in orthopedics. So we're going to need technology to kind of get over that hurdle, of really being able to improve care, improve outcomes, improve efficiencies, and ultimately, hopefully improve value and those experiences across that entire continuum of care.
Well, let's talk a bit about Zimmer Biomet's offerings. I mean, you launched just last month your ZBEdge connected intelligence suite of digital and robotics tech. What is in that suite of offerings, and how will you move forward with this package? Yeah,
so this is really meant to brand that entire suite, to your mm-hmm. point. So we have all of our connected digital health and robotic technologies. They're purpose-built to be seamlessly integrated with each other to ultimately optimize care. And so it will include today a ROSA robotics platform, a My Mobility with Apple Watch platform, our planning tools, our Omni Suite, which is basically the OR intelligence that we have. And then all of those different disparate pieces come together with our Ortho Intel intelligence platform. And the idea here is that you bring all of those data points together, which there are literally thousands across that patient's care continuum. And then we can take those data and leverage them, again, like I said, across the patient's continuum of care, pre, intra, and post-operatively.
Let's talk first about the ROSA system. How are you positioning that for orthopedic surgeons? Where is the benefit for the hospitals, for the customers who are interested in bringing in a robotic system? What are the benefits of those using the ROSA robotic system?
So I really think this idea of bringing objective measures into the OR is going to continue to be more and more important. And with robotics and with ROSA, you're able to do that. And prior to robotics, surgeons felt, they have an implant, they feel that it should go in a certain position, they make their cut, they implant, and then they move the knee around and their feel. So an orthopedic surgeon that's done hundreds and hundreds knows what a good knee feels like, and then they suture up and the patient can go on. But again, 1 in 5 patients, we don't know exactly why they're dissatisfied. So now with bringing in robotics into the surgery suite, you can now take very specific measurements and you can understand exactly the cuts that you're doing. So bringing in a much, much higher level of accuracy and truly understanding what you've done pre and intraoperatively, and then what those results may look like postoperatively. So having that accuracy and those objective measures intraoperatively, and then with ROSA specifically, we've designed it so that it really works alongside the surgeon. So it goes right into their standard workflow. It's not kind of forcing you into a new workflow. So we think that's a nice advantage. So that transition from standard instrumentation over into robotics is meant to be very smooth.
So who is driving the demand for this system or for robotic systems in general in orthopedics? Is it coming from the surgeons? Are they demanding more capabilities? Is it the hospitals that sort of want the data to track and maybe find ways to do a better job? What is the primary source of demand?
I think it's coming across the board in certain pockets, right? So first, we already talked about the patients. I think the patients, when they know that there's a robot out there that is able to give them potentially more accurate procedure and potentially a better outcome, they're going to look for that. Like I said earlier, the idea that you have technology involved in your healthcare and in the treatment that you get, I think is becoming more and more important. I think surgeons are definitely interested and are looking for ways to improve efficiency. They're looking for ways to improve their outcomes. They don't want to have that one patient that isn't satisfied. And then, of course, hospitals, not having variability within, certain cases, if they can find a way to make it cost effective, which obviously we work very hard to do that and don't have patients coming back there dissatisfied. I think that there's interest across the board and there's a competitive nature there too. If a hospital across the street doesn't have robotics, and they do, I think that, again, we go back to the patients and it pulls in patient volume for them.
Great point. And let's move down the line a bit with the My Mobility program with Apple Watch. I've got an Apple Watch. I've got certainly an abundance of apps on there. What is the function of My Mobility and how is it being received from the patient population?
So My Mobility, it's a care management system, right? And to your point, it uses the iPhone and the Apple Watch, and it is meant to help surgeons deliver support and guidance to their patients through this connected experience. And it allows the surgeon to collect and monitor objective data about their patient's surgical preparation and their recovery, right? So we had to talk about it for the patients, it's Journey Companion on their wrist. And it offers pre and post-operatively educating the patient what you should be doing. It provides exercise guidance for them. And it also allows real-time interaction and Q&A with the care team. And actually now even has functionality to do telemedicine as well through this platform. So I will tell you that the patients feel very well taken care of. Again, we've had a couple of responses back saying, especially post-operatively, you can deliver all this care. And through COVID, it's been really fun to see the kinds of responses. And they just feel like they've got this cheerleader kind of alongside them that's helping them out, telling them what they should be doing, encouraging them along, tracking how well they're doing. And this particular platform, what I think is kind of fun about it, and another thing that sort of led me over to work with Zimmer Biomet was that this was a startup company that was acquired, but it's based on a fitness gaming app. So it's built in a very different way. And also this partnership with Apple that's a little different than what I feel like I've seen in typical medtech apps. It's just built built to be super engaging, to be a very great user experience. And then again, the partnership with Apple has lent itself well for us, that we were able to get some metrics ahead of time. So now we can even measure gait through a special algorithm with the HealthKit app that we got access to early, that we can then go in and apply to our MyMobility platform.
So let's talk a bit about your smart implant system. How does that fit into all of this? Because that would seem to be an integral part.
It is, and it will be, certainly. We are really, really excited about Persona IQ, which is what we're calling the smart implant. Essentially, what that is our Persona knee system with an additional little bit of a stubby stem on it. And what that does is it collects a whole bunch of high fidelity data to track patient recovery. So this is really about post-operative measurements. So we have our MyMobility with Apple Watch platform that collects both pre and post-operatively, ROSA intraoperatively. It all goes into our ortho intelligence platform. And essentially now, with the ability to have the smart implant, it's implant in the patient. So it's not a wearable that you may forget or may not have on, or the battery may have died, but it's essentially collecting passive data always on, right? So it really maximizes patient compliance because there's nothing to wear or charge or forget. Mm-hmm. And it just collects that high fidelity data. So it gets uploaded every 24 hours into the cloud, and then it gets added and enhanced with the MyMobility and Apple Watch data. So it's a really, really nice sort of marriage of the two technologies for us going forward, and becomes an integral part of ZBEdge.
It's fascinating. So, you're making a great point for us being on the cusp of a real data-heavy orthopedic industry. So, where do we go from here, and how does Zimmer find its place?
Yeah, so I really feel like it's ZBEdge. So this idea of being connected and having, already today, we have thousands of patients on our MyMobility with Apple Watch platform, and engaging the patient and having the patient at the center of what we're doing and how we're thinking about it, I think is going to be critically important. So if you look at data-driven decision-making and what we're able to do across the platform as we are collecting these data points, like I said, thousands of them pre, intra, and post-operatively, we pull them all together into our ortho intelligence platform that is alive and well today, right? We're already making connections, looking at ROSA patients versus not ROSA patients. Now we're collecting additional information around the insights. So if you have enough of a data population, you have insights that can be generated that can then, over time, predict care and then recommend care. And so if you look at what we're doing today, and where I think that we have an edge over the competition, I'll say, is the connectivity piece, and that everything is working in concert with each other already today and built on a solid platform, versus having a portfolio where, yes, you may be collecting data, but is it valuable data, and is the data able to be pulled together and seamlessly integrated to really be able to optimize those outcomes going forward?
And how quickly do you think the data will be, or the need for data, or the understanding for the need for data will be adopted by the orthopedics industry? I
think we're going to see a snowball effect here. Mm-hmm. I think the smart implant is going to be one pretty big catalyst in that arena, because an implant is something that the orthopedic world knows very, very well. And now that is actually generating data directly from the implant, I think it's going to be a catalyst for looking at, okay, well, I have data now directly from the knee. Oh, there's this MyMobility platform that goes around that as well. And I have data from my ROSA system that can all be pulled together. And again, we're working really hard to make sure that the user experience, both from the patient perspective as well as for the surgeon and the care teams, it's not disruptive to what they're doing today, but it enhances what they're doing and hopefully will make their life easier going forward. And I think that's ultimately where you really start getting, a lot more adoption of technology. And of course, the goal here is better outcomes. So if we get to the point where the surgeons and the care teams that are leveraging the technology are finding that their patients are doing better, and that they're able to get, maybe one extra case in the OR per day, or go home a little earlier, whatever the case may be, around efficiencies, and there's value that is really being provided. I mean, that's ultimately what's going to drive the market.
Well, it's an exciting platform, and you've got me excited about orthopedics. Again, I like the idea of sort of the data mindset moving more and more into this industry. I think it's going to be fun to watch. Thanks for taking the time today and for being on the podcast, Liane.
It's absolutely my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
All right. Well, it's great to hear from Liane Teplitsky from Zimmer. We finally got Zimmer on the podcast, Chris.
Yeah.
We're completing our medtech bingo card. I want every medtech company ever on this podcast at some point. I think that's
sounds like
important.
a plan. We'll get through it. Maybe we'll get if something happens with Medline, we'll get Medline on here.
That would be great. That would be great. Always happy to learn. We got to get Zoll on here. We get more Zimmer folks. We've got to keep reaching out and serving this awesome community. And speaking of community,
it really is.
It is. It's great to be part of it. Speaking of community, Chris Newmarker, how can they find you on social media?
Well, you can find me on LinkedIn, Chris Newmarker, just like a Newmarker. You can find me on Twitter at Newmarker. And always happy to meet new people and hear new ideas for stories.
And I am on Twitter at MedTechTom. You can find me on LinkedIn, Tom Salemi. Chris and I continue to plan to be on Clubhouse at some point. Our Wednesdays have been filling up. And frankly, it's been a challenge we want to make sure we have guests. We want to make sure it's a good conversation. As much as we would enjoy just chatting with our listeners, we want to make sure when we're on there, we're bringing you some news and information. So we'll continue to work on that. Keep an eye on your Clubhouse schedule. We'll work with the MedTech group there to put on some broader discussions, and we will be back, we promise.
I'll be back.
And that's a wrap. Thanks again for joining us on the Device Talks Weekly Podcast. Please do subscribe. Please do follow Device Talks and MassDevice on social media. Please do share this podcast with your friends on social media. And when you do, tag Chris and myself on those aforementioned social media connections. We'd love to be part of that conversation. And of course, tune in next week. We'll have another great episode of the Device Talks Weekly Podcast waiting for you.
Hey, stay safe, get vaccinated.